We've all been there, right? Life gets crazy, you're swamped with work and family, and suddenly it's Sunday night, and that whole hit the gym 4 times this week plan. Yeah, out the window.
It happens to the best of us.
Exactly. So tell me if this sounds familiar. The weekend warrior approach. Cramming all your workouts into a day or two instead of spreading them out. But can that really be as good for you as that consistent daily grind we always hear about? Well, today we're diving into a study that's seriously challenging that conventional wisdom about exercise. Get this. It hints that being a weekend warrior might actually be just as beneficial.
You're right. For a long time, the assumption has been that to reap the rewards of exercise, it's got to be daily and it's got to be consistent. But this research, it throws a wrench in that thinking.
Okay, now you've really got my attention. Hit me with the highlights. What makes this study so groundbreaking?
The sheer scale of it is impressive. We're talking 89,573 people, all tracked with wrist-worn devices. And they weren't just looking at, heart rate. This study dug into the risk for over 200 diseases.
Wow, okay. 200 diseases. All right, you've officially piqued my curiosity. So
Yeah.
spill the beans, what they find. Were those late-night pizza cravings onto something after all? Can I really get away with being a weekend warrior guilt-free?
Well, let's just say the findings were pretty eye-opening. This study, and it's worth noting it was published in Circulation, a pretty big deal journal, found that people who squeezed their 150 minutes of weekly, moderate to vigorous physical activity into just 1 or 2 days, they had a similarly lower risk for those 200 diseases compared to those who exercised regularly throughout the week.
Wait, back up a second. So you're telling me that cramming it all in on the weekend could be just as good for me as spacing it out during the week? That's kind of a game changer.
It is. It really challenges what we thought we knew. Now, it's super important to remember we're talking about total activity volume here. Both groups, the weekend warriors and the regular exercisers, had a way lower risk for all those health problems compared to folks who were mostly inactive. So the when seems like it might not matter as much as we once thought, but the how much, yeah, that's still key.
Okay, so this isn't a free pass to completely ditch the gym and embrace the couch. It's more like doing something is leagues better than doing nothing.
Gotcha. But let's get specific. Yeah, can you give me an example from the study? Like, how much lower was the risk for those who actually exercised, regardless of when they got it done? Sure. Let's take a look at diabetes, since it affects a ton of people. This study found that the weekend warriors, they had a 43% lower risk of developing diabetes compared to those who weren't active. And those who exercised consistently throughout the week, they had a 46% lower risk. So there's a difference. But honestly, not as big as you might expect.
Wow, 43% is huge. That's
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It really makes you realize our bodies are capable of so much more than we sometimes give them credit for. You mentioned the study looked at over 200 diseases, and that this whole weekend warrior thing was especially noticeable for what you called cardiometabolic conditions. Now, I got to be honest, that sounds a little like doctor speak to me.
Yeah, it can be a mouthful, can it? Cardiometabolic basically refers to anything that affects your heart and how your body uses energy. So we're talking some serious stuff. Heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, even some cancers.
Okay, that clears things up. So it's not just about when you exercise, but how much overall. It sounds like fitting in those workouts whenever you can swing them might be just as beneficial for dodging those cardiometabolic bullets as spreading them out, right?
That's what this research is pointing to. It's pretty exciting stuff. However, and there's always a however, right? We got to acknowledge that this is just one study. More research is definitely needed to really confirm these findings and see if they apply to different groups of people over longer periods. Still, I think what's so cool about this is how it challenges our assumptions about exercise.
It's true. It's like we get so caught up in finding that perfect routine, how many workouts, what time of day, all that, that we forget our bodies are incredibly adaptable. It's like we're so busy trying to fit into this mold of what we think a healthy lifestyle should look like that we forget, our bodies are actually pretty amazing at reeling with the punches.
That's exactly it. It's less about sticking to some rigid schedule and more about understanding that our bodies are, well, they're kind of remarkable in how they adapt to different patterns, like when we push ourselves and when we rest.
You mentioned earlier that this got you thinking about how this whole adaptability thing might apply to other parts of our health too. What did you mean by that? Like, what other rules do we maybe need to, I don't know, rethink a little?
I'm glad you asked. Because if our bodies can adapt to different exercise patterns, right, could that apply to other things too? Let's take sleep, for example. We always hear about needing a solid 8 hours every single night. But what if, and this is just a thought, but what if your bodies could actually do well on different amounts of sleep? Maybe even shorter bursts with some wakefulness mixed in, as long as the overall sleep quality is good. Or how about work-life balance? We all chase this idea of perfect balance, but maybe it's really about figuring out our own rhythm, Recognizing that there will be times when our energy and focus are higher and times when they're lower.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. So instead of trying to force this unattainable ideal of consistent perfection in every area of our lives, maybe it's more about figuring out what works for us as individuals, kind of like
Yeah.
tuning into our own rhythm and then adapting our lives around that. Do you think this whole idea could even apply to how we handle challenges in general?
Exactly. Think about it. We tend to see a challenge and think we have to power through it, push ourselves to the absolute limit. But what if, just like with exercise, our bodies actually benefit from going all in on something and then taking time to recover and reflect? Maybe the key to overcoming obstacles isn't about brute force, but about figuring out our own capacity for stress and recovery. Finding that rhythm that lets us tackle things head on without burning ourselves out in the process.
So if we take what we're learning from this weekend warrior study and kind of zoom out a bit, it seems like the takeaway isn't about finding this perfect routine for everything in our lives. It's more about understanding our own personal rhythm, knowing how we operate best, and adapting our lifestyles to support that. Instead of squeezing ourselves into some predetermined box, maybe it's about recognizing that our bodies are way more adaptable than we often give them credit for.
I completely agree. This whole idea opens up a world of possibilities for how we approach health and well-being. It's less about striving for some flawless, perfectly balanced life,
hmm
and more about understanding what makes us tick as individuals and then learning how to make that work for us.
It's like we've been so busy reading all the books and trying to follow all the rules that we forgot to listen to, the expert that's been with us since day one, our own bodies.
Exactly. We're not machines that need to be programmed with some super specific set of instructions, right? We're these adaptable, dynamic beings, and we're capable of handling way more than we often give ourselves credit for.
This has been such a fascinating conversation. It really feels like we're just scratching the surface here with this whole adaptability thing.
Oh, we are. We are. This is really just the beginning. And honestly, I think this is part of a much bigger conversation we need to be having about health and well-being. It's less about these rigid rules, these do's and don'ts, and more about figuring out what works for you as an individual. Because we're all different, right?
That's so true. So as we wrap things up here, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners today? What's the one thing they can do to put this newfound knowledge into practice?
I think the most important thing is to really tune in and pay attention to your body. Listen to what it's telling you. Are you truly exhausted, or are you just stuck in that need to hit the gym every day mindset? Don't be afraid to experiment a bit. Find what works for you. And yeah, easier said than done, but try to find some consistency, whatever that looks like. Because whether you're a total weekend warrior or you're someone who loves that daily gym routine, finding something you can stick with long term, well, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, we need to redefine what healthy even means. It's not about fitting into some perfect mold. It's about figuring out what makes you feel your best, physically, mentally, the whole package.
You said it. And this whole deep dive into the world of weekend warriors, it's shown us that there's more than one way to approach exercise, but it's also got us thinking about how we can live healthier, more fulfilling lives just by tapping into our own inner wisdom. Because our bodies are pretty darn smart, and they usually give us clues about what they need if we just pay attention.
This has been an incredible conversation. I know I've learned a lot. And hey, maybe this is that little nudge we all needed to ditch those rigid health rules and start truly listening to what our bodies have been trying to tell us all along. Until next time, keep exploring those fascinating health questions, and we'll be here to dive deep with you again soon.